listening to the PR Wind Down podcast, the show for public relations professionals who are ready to see real change in the PR industry. We are your hosts, April White and Laura Schooler. Let's get ready to wind down.
Should we start with our what not to do from PR pros who know?
Yes, do we know? What do we know? What shouldn't we do?
So do not let your egomaniac client convince you that his/her ideas are novel without checking that they are before pitching them. I think this is a pretty good one.
Wait, I want you to define novel in this case.
So I think it could be that their concepts or their thought leadership platforms or the way that they're viewing their product, right? Oh, this is never before seen. This has never been on the market. And too often, I think as practitioners, we just take it, oh, they must know. They're the expert in their space. Let's,
right.
This is an operating system that's never existed before. Amazing.
Right.
And then you go and you're like, oh, wait, 3 other people are doing this already and they already have media coverage.
Right.
But meanwhile, you've already kind of promised them the moon only to find out that what they're doing isn't novel.
So I think that, and the reason why I had to ask you to define novel is for our listeners, not because I didn't know.
Likely story.
I mean, I think, so this is one example actually of due diligence that you should do for a lot of different reasons on a client. And I think we're talking mostly about like startups or small companies that you don't know, that aren't like, common knowledge type companies. And even in that case, but I think specifically more in startups or new companies, smaller companies that aren't household names. And I think you get excited as a firm that takes these kind of companies on, that somebody is interested in, you doing their PR, that sometimes you don't focus on the due diligence. It's sort of like buying a condo and not checking that the terrace is falling off. You're so excited to buy it. So there's lots of things. That's one example of like
totally hypothetical.
Right. That's one example of competitors, right? The competitive space, or is what they're saying as, exciting or applicable. And then there's other things too, like, do they have a criminal background? Do they really have the funding that they claim that they have? Do they, those kinds of things. And I think you can only, to a limit, I mean, you're not going to hire a PI to like follow them around, but just to do that basic type of due diligence, and not necessarily to say, oh, we're not going to do your PR, but at the very least to help you guide the conversation when you're courting each other.
Mm-hmm. Right. Or when you're drafting up the contract,
mm-hmm.
If you see that there's a potential issue.
Right. Like if you end up going to prison, you still owe us for the full contract, or you can't take us down with you because we weren't your PR firm.
Right. No, or in the case of, writing in, well, we're going to freeze your account if you're more than 10 days late, if you see that they're not necessarily on the up and up with their finances.
Right.
So that you don't get yourself in a world of hurt, right? Due on receipt. If you don't pay in the first 10 days, you're frozen until you pay.
Or maybe you want to check the owners or the company's social media and see, are they like posting,
racist
things. Right, exactly. Conspiracy theories, that are just anathema to anything you'd want to get involved in.
Yeah, I think that's smart. Yeah, and I think, and I've seen it in press releases too, right? Where the client says, oh, about, this is amazing. And they're basically feeding you their marketing language, which is great for marketing, but it's not great for PR if it's not actually news. So
right,
I think,
because you have to anticipate as the PR person, what question is a reporter going to ask about this? Or what fairly easy research could a reporter do to debunk whatever claims you're making?
Right. And the same thing with the thought leadership stuff, right? I know a lot of executives who they're so used to everybody bowing down to whatever it is that they say, and then they say something grandiose about their industry and they can't back it up, and it's or it's something that's already been said before, and then you make the mistake of putting it into a byline only to find out, oh, Actually, this has all been said for 5 years or 6 years.
Right.
They just amalgamated it into a new format, which is semi-interesting, but still not going to get the placement.
It's not new.
It's not new.
Right. So there's that. The only thing is I don't want to scare people. I want to encourage them to do this due diligence so that they're better informed, so that they are just better equipped, and you don't find yourself like, you don't want to be flat-footed, and like, you want to know the lay of the land so that you can message it, so that you can approach it in a different way, so that at least you're not like, oh my God, what? when somebody says something to you, and that you can always respond in a meaningful way. So that doesn't mean you have to like not take the client or fire the client or anything like that. You just have to, think about it in a different way, which will hopefully ultimately help you and your client.
Right.
Right. Have you ever decided to not go with a client or stop discussions with them for new business based on what you've researched that you can think of?
No, but I've learned the lesson about doing it.
So you're going to do it more now, or is it just something you do now and so it sort of changes the trajectory of your...
I think it mostly changes the trajectory, but also I think we're to a point where we can afford to be pickier.
Were you ever involved in that when you were at bigger agencies, or were you too junior?
If you remember, when I was at Rubenstein, I actually did all of the new business pitches and proposals. So that was my full-time job. So I didn't realize that. So every single meeting that Richard Rubenstein had, I sat in, took notes, wrote the proposal, had Richard review it, and then for a while the salesperson had quit and there was no replacement. So for a short time, maybe a few months, I was actually doing both, which was nuts.
Well, yeah, but hasn't it helped you now in what you're doing now?
100%.
Yeah.
I never would have didn't even know how much I picked up by doing that.
Right. You never do until you start doing this stuff on your own. Like younger people say to me, oh my God, how did you know that? And I'm like, I didn't know that I knew that until I was in the position of having to say, wait a second, what about XYZ? They're like, oh my God, you're so smart. And I'm like, yes, but no.
Yes, I am.
No,
yes,
I am. Experience matters so much. So I have two questions for you. Do you have some sort of process personally that you go through to reflect on what you've done and how you can change it? And I'm talking specifically in terms of getting new business.
The learnings have gone into the contracts. So for example, we had an incident with a client who decided to hire a second PR firm that their investors had demanded they hire. And suddenly it was dueling PR firms and we were all vying for contacts. And there was nothing in the contract to say you can't do that. So if I had said no, it would have made me look territorial and like not a team player, and I wasn't understanding the client's pain points. But if I'd had it in the contract, I could just simply say, sorry, it's in the contract. And also, you can't do PR for yourself. Another client started pitching herself to the New York Times without letting us know, pitched an exclusive to the New York Times, landed it, and then demanded that we pull the article that she was going to instead take the article that had already been accepted by sheknows.com and give it straight to the New York Times. And it would have ruined our relationship, which
it kind of your problem.
Right. And then made it my problem to tell She Knows that they couldn't have her article anymore, which they had already slated for running. So now in our contracts, right? Okay, you can't do your own PR and you can't hire another PR agency.
Yeah.
So those are a couple. Yeah, so those are a couple things. And then I've gotten a lot more blunt about pricing up front, so I don't waste a lot of time having conversations with people that aren't going to be able to actually, and building relationships with them and then finding out that they're not going to pay. See, those are the main things. And then the only other thing is sometimes clients are very pushy at the outset because they want to establish boundaries. And sometimes that irons out, but sometimes you have to keep an eye on it and say, okay, if getting the contract approved took this much back and forth, this might be a difficult client. And then keeping an eye on it and making sure that you have that thing in there, right? Like, okay, you ought to pay up front. And if you don't pay within 10 days, your account's frozen.
I mean, people,
I mean, I'm not,
But you want to get paid for work performed, yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm not a pushover. I mean, I think, right, it can end up being a little shocking, I think, this little blonde girl with the cheerful sing-song voice and then suddenly like slapped with a lawsuit. Like, but hey, I live in the wilderness in Arizona.
You're like, you're like Linda Hamilton and
What would I be scared
Terminator.
of? Laura, our guest is about to join us. Are you ready for this?
Yes, I am.
So today we're joined by Hamish Anderson. He's the founder of 3Piece Marketing, and he's here to chat with us about the power of perspective, aligning your marketing and business goals and industry pain points and more. How are you?
Oh, good. How are you?
Good.
How's the world treating you?
Well, it's pretty wild over here.
There's a lot going on for you guys.
It's a lot. It's never a dull moment. So, Hamish, I know we talked about all these different things, right? The power of perspective, why you should align your marketing goals with your business objectives, which we see a problem with more frequently than you would think reasonable as a lay of the land. But I don't know if there's a point you want to just dive in.
For me, I think that the first thing is probably, making sure business goals and marketing are aligned. For me, that's always been something that I think is too often overlooked, and it's something I've become very passionate about. One of the things that, when I started out in my own business, I was very passionate about was making sure that when you start building a platform for ongoing success, that you're actually looking at what, if it's a big organization, a small, whatever, it doesn't matter, that you've got that alignment between, what the business is actually trying to drive towards so that the marketing can support that.
I think this is especially true in PR. I see so many campaigns and so many different agencies that all they care about is getting media hits, and none of the coverage necessarily maps back to the business goals or the marketing goals or even moves the needle remotely. But they're so excited, they'll come up with this huge campaign. I remember the first time this happened to me. I don't want to mention the company or the agency. So I was working on a biscuit company. The agency had come up with a race for the biscuit company, and there was some kind of a race across America for the biscuit company that we're supposed to pitch. Now, first of all, none of that seemed on brand. Why would a biscuit company have anything to do with a race? And why would press about a biscuit company's race move the needle for their, and so there was just this the huge disconnect in my head. I don't understand why we're pitching this. And I think I see that a lot. And then I see also things where they're just, there's a lot of news jacking and trend jacking that's sort of semi-related. So a client who had a second PR firm, we just talking about this. And the second PR firm just started, pitching them for like, hey, Tiger's got COVID. We should make you, the center of the interview for that. And it was like, has nothing to do with the business model or the product they're selling or even this guy's expertise. But suddenly he was so excited. He's on Newsmax, doing an interview about the tiger that got COVID and then what this means for pets. And it was like, what? Like, in what world does that help him?
Yeah, it's a vanity metric, as I like to call it. It's just all about the eyeballs that you've got or the impressions, but it's not meaningful. It's purely a vanity. Oh, this is how popular we are for that, flash in the pan, but it's not actually, as you say, going to move that needle long term. And, I saw that, and it's still to an extent happening, but, the whole influencer model, we must get these people onto our social media because that's, they're the big it star at the moment. And if we have them on our brand talking about something that's not really relevant, but maybe it's relevant, that's going to really put a rocket under our sails or whatever it might be. And it made me, I came up with a term, you can laugh at it if you like, but it's flopularity, because they have nothing to do with your actual brand. They're just, you're paying them obscene amounts of money to promote something that's not actually going to go very far. No, it's ridiculous. And I think that's the thing for me, why do brands, they know better. They know how much you can measure things and, they can see the long term and the short term, but too many people, I don't know if it's human nature or if it's just the need to impress quickly because we're a more transient society, but why are we so focused on the short term? Why can't people look at that longer term and understand that, we need to put these objectives in place so that we can actually build something which is more robust and it's going to have longer term, in the sense of it lasts longer, gain.
Do you feel like people's attention spans or patience has dwindled?
People's interest is dwindling, not so much because they're not interested, but I think that there's so many competitive factors now. You're interested in looking at your phone, you're looking at the TV, you're interested in looking at what's happening on social media. And so you're getting bombarded from so many different avenues that your desire to absorb the information has almost dwindled. And I think it's just become this fatigue. You don't know that you are fatigued, and so you're just you're switching off generally. So it's only when you're actively looking for something that you've got a chance of, as a marketer, of making an impression on them, and those moments are becoming fewer and further between.
I do think you make an interesting point before about, is it just that people are impatient? And I think there is a level of that, because they either have to prove to their boss immediately that who they hired is getting the results that they need to see, or the investors or the board members, whoever it is, and it needs to be done immediately. I mean, Laura and I were just discussing in our last podcast about how clients expect you to get results in the first month, right? You just joined us. We should have media hits, by the end of the month. What? Like, that's maybe possible, but there's even a lead time. Even if they say yes to the pitch on the first go, and there's not follow-up done, it's still there's time between when they're interested and when they publish.
Yeah, I've started saying I have to set your expectations early, and that's often, as part of the pitch process. This is how long it's going to take, and if you're not willing to acknowledge that, then I don't think we're the right partner for you as well, because it puts pressure on you, and in your own head you're not going to deliver to it, and so you're stressing, you're trying to put too much attention onto them, you're neglecting other clients, and as a result, everything goes to pot. So it's all about setting those objectives. And I say, look, let's set these objectives, and this is the realistic timeframes for those. And if you can actually buy into that and trust us, that's where this relationship will start. And once we've got that foundation, then, we can work together. And so, whether or not it's trying to push the funnel early through a paid campaign, or we're doing something a little bit more organic, we put roadmaps together and we say, look, have a look at this. This is what we're going to do month to month. You can measure us by whether or not we're doing this, but this is the point in the process where we think we're going to see meaningful results. So it might take 3-4 months before you start seeing something, but that first month, I say to them, we're learning who you are and you're learning who we are. And we then have to interpret that story and take that out to market in a way which is meaningful for them. If it was as simple as just turning something on, you would have done it. Right. And I think sometimes when you say that to them, they go, oh, well, that's a good point. If we could do it, we would.
I'm curious if you make them sign off on the timeline before you sign them. So do you say, hey, if you're going to be okay with this, because this might be something I need to learn from, and, have the clients who think they're going to have, TechCrunch in month 1 to manage that. If you want to sign up with us, this is what it's going to be 3 months before you see TechCrunch. Are you still okay with that? Rather than getting into a situation where, they're breathing down your neck and sending you emails every 2 days because you're not in TechCrunch yet.
Look, I think that it might be because we're very similar industries, but slightly different. I think some of our deliverables can be more tangible. It's a little bit flexible in the sense that if they don't achieve the timelines on their side, then it has to move obviously a little bit. But we are very transparent in that sense that we say, look, this is the process we're going through, and this is why we're going through it. And we educate them in that way as well, because as we say to them, more about your industry and your brand than we ever will. And we need to pick some of those key learnings out from you, so we have those insights to take forward, and that takes time.
Right. There's a lot of A/B testing involved by nature.
Absolutely. And I think if you're not A/B testing and you're not looking at ongoing enhancement and improvement, then you're not doing your job.
I'm curious. I know a lot of times when you come up with the perfect branding campaign or integrated marketing campaign, which is the thing I have more experience with, it tends to be, oh, no, duh, of course, it's an obvious solution, but the best solutions tend to be the most obvious. In my opinion, I don't know if you agree with that. So
yeah, I think so. I think simple is best quite often, but for me, we use a model to try and discover what we call light bulb moments. Those moments where you go, oh, of course, why didn't we think of that? Or why didn't I
Yes.
know that about the brand before? Have you heard of Rumsfeld's dilemma?
No.
Yeah, he came up with the 4-quadrant square that was the known knowns, the known unknowns, etc., the unknown knowns and the unknown unknowns. And what we like to do is try and map all of those different quadrants out with the information that we know about a brand and the information we know about the audience that you're trying to target as a brand as well. And it's what we find the most exciting things to come out of that is the unknown knowns. So the things you don't actually know about. So you know that you don't know about your audience, and you know that you don't know how they're using your product or your service. And when you start to go down that route and you try and understand a bit more about that brand and learn things that you didn't know, you're like, oh. And then when you flip that and you try and tell your audience things that you take for granted because you live, you breathe, and you know your brand inside out, and you can turn that into information that they go, oh, I never even thought of that before. And I use the example of, in your car, when you go to fill it up with gas, and they say, which side do you fill it up? Is it on the left or the right-hand side? And I'm sure you've seen this before, and it depends on which side the Bowser is on in the car, on the left or the right. It will tell you which side you're meant to fill up on.
Wait,
I say,
what?
Yeah.
I didn't drive for 19 years or whatever, something like that. Because I was like, I hate cars, get rid of it. I moved to New York, and I have no idea of that. But furthermore, I don't even pump my own gas ever. And in New Jersey, you're not allowed to. And it's cheaper anyway. So I go to New Jersey to get gas, so I don't have to be like the idiot who can't pump their own gas, because nobody's allowed to pump their own gas.
Well, have a look. Next time you're in the car, have a look and you'll see what I mean. You'll now know why. And I use that as one of those things where if people knew that it's, I didn't know that about something, but you've made it really easy for me to understand and interpret. Well, then that's something that's meaningful for them. And so that light bulb goes off in their head and they remember it.
How do you know when you hit a light bulb moment?
I think I've been asked this question before. I think when you're sitting there and you're brainstorming with your client, we don't try and go away and come up with these by ourselves. This is an intensive workshop where you sit there and you're throwing ideas around and you're interrogating their questions. And the favorite question which we have when we're doing these processes is why. And people, we're the best brand. Well, why? Oh, because our product quality is better. Why? And you go down this rabbit hole.
Right.
And when you get to a point where they say, well, we're only, we're using products which are sourced ethically, and you go, okay, we've got to something where it's meaningful now. We can take that forward and repackage that, because that's so far down that rabbit hole that you haven't even thought about it. But if we make that into a sales point, or we bring that out as a proof point, we can actually use that as a communication point.
I like that.
I do too.
How do you ask the whys without offending clients?
Up front. By the way, I'm going to really piss you off today, because I'm going to be asking why and challenging you on everything you tell me. And just because you know it and you know it to be true doesn't mean that I have to accept it. So when we're going through this, what I'm trying to do is get the same in-depth knowledge that you have for a moment of time. And that means I'm just going to keep asking you annoying questions till I can understand it. And they're like, okay, and they laugh at you. And then you see them by the end of the day going, oh, seriously, would you stop? But it works for the point of, okay, I think when you're honest with them up front, and that's what as an agents, we're about transparency. If you say, this is what we're going to do, and this is why we're going to do it, and this is the outcomes you're going to get, people are like, okay, I'm willing to go for that ride. It's 6 hours of my day or 8 hours or whatever it might be, but they know what's going to come from it. And then when you get to that and you have those moments and you sit there, everyone quite often, not everyone, more often than not, people sit there and they go, oh, and you can see that weight lift off their shoulders when they go, we've got to some of those moments now. And it's interesting as well. I did this exercise with I won't say the name, but I did this with a client recently, and they're in healthcare industry. And we were there and they were like, oh, we're the preeminent brand and we do this and we are gold standard. And we were going through this process. And one of the questions is, what do you need to improve and what would you like to do? And we just kept going. And I said, so why this and why are you not good at that? And we ended up basically unraveling everything that they thought that they were as a brand. They realized that they weren't delivering to. And so all of these moments of, this is what we're going out to market saying, were not true. And so they finally realized that there was a dichotomy between who they were presenting as and who they were being interpreted as. And it meant we could really just get down to the nuts and bolts of repositioning them as a brand and then building back up. And so sometimes those light bulb moments are quite polarizing because it really just strips you back. But from there, you can rebuild.
And then what was the outcome in that case?
That was
like down the road.
No, well, the outcome was we had to do a second day of rebuilding to basically now redefine the brand. And then from there, we have then started rebuilding their marketing platform. It's still in process at the moment, and it's quite a large project, this one, but it's going very well. And we know that what we're going to deliver, which is a new digital platform, is going to be something which we wouldn't have got to if we hadn't had some of those epiphanies.
Right.
That's super cool.
And I think that and it comes back to something that you said earlier, April, when you were introducing me about perspective. I think perspective, when you can look at when you look to change perspective, then you can often get some of those light bulb moments. And so I say to clients, we need to look at tilting the way we look at things here and interrogating it from all sides, because if we're only looking at it through the same window that you were before, we're not going to uncover anything new. So that's that whole perspective thing. So to bring that back to what we were discussing earlier, I think if you don't look at getting under the covers and getting a little bit uncomfortable, then you're not going to do the best job you can.
Right. They hired you to improve their situation, not to do the same. More of the same.
Yeah. Well, that's yes. It's funny you should say that. We have a line we say to them all the time: "You didn't go into business to be the same as everybody else, so why would you market yourself that way?"
Right.
Yeah.
So smart. So what you said earlier, that your pain points, customers' pain points, can be the secret to their success.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you say that?
Because if you don't know where your pain points are, you can never really solve them. And I think if you assume that you know what the pain points are in the market, you're always looking to solve those, but there's another one there, and we can't get more business because we don't have the capacity to deal with it. Well, why? Oh, because we don't have processes in place to be able to do it. So if we get more than 100 inquiries a week, we're going to burn half of those. Well, how do we fix that? It's not that your funnel is not working, it's the fact that your back-end processes are not working, and that becomes an integral part of solving the marketing problem. That's why I think that's important to address those. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it's great. It's super good. I feel like we owe you an answer to something. What questions do you have for us?
I was going to ask you, thank you, when you look at the role of PR and marketing as a joint function, where do you see the biggest synergies that are often overlooked?
I would say what I like to say about PR is that it builds credibility better than any other piece of the marketing equation. And so that means you're getting the third party credibility, the media that's writing about your thing because it's earned. You earned the coverage because of something that you're doing that's interesting enough to be newsworthy and in the press, right? I also think it does the thought leadership side of things, right? So you're showing that the executive teams are uniquely qualified to be leading the company, and they have really interesting hot takes on issues in the industry and trends that are happening, things like that. I think when there's an integrated campaign that's outside of the box enough or big enough or interesting enough, you can also pitch that directly. So if, for example, you were doing some grandiose campaign that was on brand and did a line, it wasn't some weird, race for the cure for biscuits, then there's actually a great synergy there, is directly where you get to leverage that. But the other piece of it is just that I think if you have PR that's driving the credibility, then you can pull that into marketing and advertising, right? And say, here we're gonna start repurposing that content. We're gonna boost the posts that you got in this publication among these target audiences that we want to make sure saw the story. And so there's a great way of taking that credibility and putting it in marketing efforts, or even putting it in a newsletter that you're going to share, right? Mm-hmm. Hey, look, our CEO was just featured in Forbes. Because I think the more that clients know that you are in the news, even if they never read the articles, the more that they just say, oh, wow, they're legit. Oh, wow, they're really getting big. Oh, wow, they're really doing something interesting. It's all about the impression of it, right? Even if the story itself is something they already knew about. So that, I don't know if Laura wants to add to that.
I do. On the B2B side, actually, I want to add. So I worked at PricewaterhouseCoopers for a long, long time. I was an internal, PR director over a number of industries. I was on a PR, like the US PR team, and I worked with all of the internal marketing people who were like the marketing people for the banking industry at PwC, or the asset management or insurance or real estate, and they were all marketers. So everything that they were doing, I was taking, and my PR agency was taking and putting out into the media to either try to get our reports written about, or our partners interviewed, or our events attended, etc. So all of the actual content and material was coming from the marketers. Mm-hmm. And then also, one of the senior banking guys would always say, I want to get on TV because when I have a client meeting or a company that could be our client meeting, the first thing they do is Google me. And if what pops up is that I was on CNBC talking about international banking issues, it's going to help me immensely when I go into that meeting.
Would it be fair to say then it's reputation management as much as anything?
And building, yeah.
Reputation building?
Well, it depends. I would say reputation management implies that there might be some SEO disasters that you're cleaning up through getting good press.
And some people do.
And so
some people do, that's true.
Right, or if it's a celebrity. We've talked about this too, April. Like, sort of, there's a little nuance when you're dealing with like celebrity PR or an athlete PR person than like a company or a product.
I was also going to ask about what's the biggest misperception regarding the value that you offer. Is this?
We talk about this all the time.
Yeah, so do I. So that's why I'm asking. It's good to ask the question for a change. And also, is that a pain point, or are there other pain points? So I'll do that as a two-pronged question.
I'll let Laura start this one.
Well, I was going to say you should do it, April, because it's the whole like PR and consumer PR, which is less of my experience, but I've been gaining it. That if a company that has a product gets a PR firm, that PR firm is going to get their product in articles that will immediately drive untold number of sales. And it rarely actually happens that way.
Wow. When was the last time you read something that changed your mind like that?
Right. Like, oh my God, in the magazine, buying it now, done. Like,
yeah, that's right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that's what I say to my customers as well, that, just because someone's seen something for the first time doesn't mean that you're going to change their buying behavior instantly. Right. Unless we're talking, you're giving something which was, tens of thousands of dollars away for half price or whatever it might be, and they can see that there's a massive opportunity there, which you're not going to be doing. You're not going to sway that quickly. You need to look at this as a long-term play. And that comes back to that roadmap that I was saying before.
Right. And to build on what Laura was saying, I think they also view PR too often as a magic wand. And they think all by itself, we're just getting it in the press, and then everything that we don't have figured out on the back end is magically going to come together. So they have this, fantasy, right? That we just get in the New York Times, we just get in TechCrunch, we just get in the Wall Street Journal, and then all of our problems are solved. And usually they just aren't there yet. The marketing mix isn't complete, right? They don't have the sales funnel going. They don't have the marketing. There's so many different pieces to success that putting that much weight on, one leg of a four-legged stool, there's no universe in which, that story is going to fix all these other things. And the other problem is similar to that is they think, oh, well, we can see where we're going and how big we're going to be, and that we're going to take the market by storm, even though we have no proof points yet, or we have a couple. And all we have to do is talk about our plans and where we are today, and everyone's going to roll over.
Right. Anybody can say, I'm going to raise $10 million. I could say that.
Right.
Yeah.
Until you do it.
We're going to change the way things are done in the U.S. for this industry. It's like, good for you. Call me when you've done it. Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is the thing. It's all about balance. And you find that the clients are ready to give you the information that they need to for you to actually formulate compelling, go-to-market pieces.
Almost never. And some are very good about giving the information, and some it's like pulling teeth. So a lot of times they tell you something, okay, we're amazing. Don't you get it? You were amazing. And then, well, why are you amazing? Because we're amazing and we're better than everyone else. Move on, get us the article. So then what you have to do is, okay, let's get you an interview where the media is going to ask hard questions. Then we're going to learn stuff that we can pitch to other journalists.
We've gotten more info and sometimes with some clients from reading an article because they actually had to answer the journalist's questions. They wouldn't give it to us because they're like, well, whatever. It's not that important. I don't know what you're talking about, whatever. But then when they're talking to a reporter, they're like, oh, I got to answer these questions. And then that's when we find out.
That's
or they don't want to take the time, but they'll take the time for the media, but they won't take it for their team.
Right.
Is that because they're time poor, or is that because they think it's so obvious?
They think it's so obvious.
Really? I was going to say because they're time poor.
Well, in the case you're talking about, it's time poor.
Preface that. I know, having worked with PR agencies before, but what's your model of interrogation for getting that info?
We start with a messaging document, which essentially means that they have to give us all of the things that they're saying about themselves. We have to get additional information, put it all in one document, put it in front of them and say, is this how you want to talk about yourselves? Because more often than not, what they've put on their website, they don't even agree with anymore and they don't know it. So if you pulled information from their website and you put it in a press release and you haven't already gone through it with them, I would say 50% of the time they're going to come back, well, that's not how we want to talk about this. And you can't say, oh, we pulled it from your website, because then you look like you're really defiant. So it's better to just start with the messaging document. Okay, let's get this right. Or at least the press background or whatever it looks like, And then the other piece of it that we've just started doing is part of the kickoff meeting is doing a mock interview to see how they would respond, so that you can actually ask them the hardball questions, which I'm sure you found out. That's why I asked you that question earlier, right? Like, how do you do that without offending them?
It's prickly, and it does, sometimes you can see the hackles rising. You think, I'm not on the opposition here. I'm trying to help you. I said, it doesn't matter how well written something is, if it doesn't add value and it doesn't have context in the greater scheme of what you're trying to say to people, then let's not include it. And, oh no, but this is very important. I say, who to? To you, to them, you need to understand. I said, I can give you the best dissertation and white paper on Napoleon Bonaparte, and you can put that on your website. Why would we do that? That's not relevant to our audience. I said, neither is what you're telling us at the moment.
Wow, I'd love to be a fly on the wall and watch that happen.
I'll record the next one for you. Do you mind if I just put this up here for you?
That would be great. And when you say context, do you mean proof points? Do you mean evidence? Do you mean that they have to be doing it? Or do you mean it needs to be contextually relevant to, or that
all
plus
of the above.
It needs, all of the above?
All of the above. I mean, it's got to be contextual in the sense that, okay, this is a relevant proof point for what we're actually talking about. If we're talking about, I'll pick something at random, cars, and you're talking about the fact that it comes with inbuilt window tinting, and that has nothing, and you're selling a car which is at the premium end of the market, they're expecting window tinting to come with it. So telling them that it has window tinting is absolutely irrelevant. But if you say to them that what you're going to do is every time they get the car service, give them a brand new car to drive around for the time that you've got their car in the shop, then they're going to go, ooh, that's interesting. That's something no one else is offering me that. That's contextual because that's what I think is relevant in the experience that I should get from a brand like that. And so I think that those aspects are very important in that whole equation of, okay, what is the context here? Is this meaningful to my end audience? And is it meaningful to us? Don't go out there and sprout things which are not meaningful to you as a business if that's going to bring in low-hanging fruit, and that low-hanging fruit is rotten, because then you're spending too much time servicing, shit clients, excuse the expression, but, who are not going to return what you need them to because you've just gone for that low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, I like that. And keeping the PR consistent, but not in a direct sales kind of way, right? Mm-hmm. You want what people see in PR to support their needs and wants, not to be like, buy again, that doesn't get people to buy. And I feel like a lot of clients don't understand that.
Well, it's like if you go to a great restaurant, the great restaurant isn't just because the food is awesome. If you go in there and it's filthy and there's food on the floor and you see a rat scamper by, that service is not going to make you want to go back, no matter how good that food was. And then the same, if you go there and the service is exceptional and the wine's brilliant and the food's terrible, you're not going back. It's about how do you bring all those ingredients together in a meaningful way. You know, I often say to clients, I've said to clients many times, you know, the difference between a souffle and an omelette is attention to detail, and that's what it is. So if you don't get that right, then you take something which has really got potential and make a mess of it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I feel like I've gone to a master class.
Oh, I don't think so. I've just been rambling and asking strange questions. So
No, it's been super helpful.
I have some closing questions for Hamish. You ready?
Yeah.
Number 1, rugby or cricket?
Ooh, rugby. Yeah, cricket. I mean, if you go to a test 5 days, then I find that, you know, unless it's a really high quality and evenly matched game, it's too long. But rugby I like, but then the state of Australian rugby at the moment, it's terrible. So it's a tough question.
Oh, is it? I don't even know that. Okay.
It's horrible.
These are like American people asking Australian people questions.
It's all good.
It's a new segment.
Right. Then my other question, AC/DC or In Excess?
Oh. If I was to have to choose and never listen to one again,
there's a gun to your head. We're going to.
Yeah, if the choice was you could never listen to one of them again, I would probably I would listen to In Excess. That's a tough question. That's unfair. That's a very unfair question.
Last question for you. Do you have
Yes.
anything you want to plug? Any projects you're working on? Any kind of accounts you'd love to land, especially Americans, since most of our audience is here?
Nike, if you're listening, I'd love to work with you, but
I'm sure the senior people of Nike are listening to our podcast.
120%.
the clients that we want to work with are the ones that are willing to challenge the status quo and willing to be challenged back. We don't want to work with people who are willing to sit back and do what they've always done. So if you have any clients or if anyone's listening and you know you're ready to shake things up and look at how you can evolve what you're doing and get some results, then let's have a chat.
Love it. Well, good.
So, thank you very much, guys. This has been fantastic.
Yeah, it's been super fun. If there's ever a chance to work together, that would be amazing.
I'd love to, guys. I really would.
Okay,
Thank you.
awesome. Thank you so much for your time. Have a good rest of your day.
Bye.
Okay, so Laura, let's talk about the PR news of the week.
All right. I'll try to shift gears. So the Texans fired their VP of Communications, Amy Palcic. I'm guessing that's how you say her last name, telling her she was no longer a cultural fit. Meanwhile, Amy Palcic was the first and only woman to have full PR responsibilities for an NFL team. She was the winner of the 2017, which is just 3 years ago, Roselle Award for Best PR Staff, and she is widely respected. I've read this in many places. So the NFL, the Houston Texans, are getting blowback after firing this woman, and a lot of different reporters and PR pros actually came out in her defense.
Wow.
The criticism towards the Texans has been growing. But the thing that really got me, and it goes back to what we talked about so many times, it does not matter if you are great and have gotten awards and have gotten money and have saved the company money. If somebody at some point, for whatever reason, decides you're out, you're out. Now, it's easy to say in this case that maybe it's because she's a woman and it's the NFL and it's an old boys network and all of that, but I don't know. I don't know if that's why, who knows what really happened. I mean, we may never know, right? And it's really bad it's almost like no matter what you do, the rug can get ripped out from under you the next day. And that just is not a good way to be dramatic, but like build America. Like if you have a workforce who knows that even if you do the greatest thing that you might get fired the next day, why is anybody really going to invest their life's work in any corporate America function?
Now, what do they mean by not a cultural fit? Is there, I just see a quote here. It was definitely my call. Texans team president James Roots told the Houston Chronicle's Aaron Wilson, I gave her the role a number of years ago and just felt the need to make a change. Leadership is sometimes a very lonely job, and from time to time you have to make a move that impacts the people that you care about deeply. This is one of those unfortunate times. That doesn't sound like she was fired because she was a woman. I mean, that sounds like there was a clash of personalities or of expectations.
So she said that it was the most humiliating day of her life.
I saw that in her tweet.
Yeah, so people are like, well, what does that mean exactly? Like, is it just that is that the right word? Was the communication of this news some way insensitive or bungled? Is the whole story really being told? Like, it's just very strange. But somebody said, basically, it was hilarious. Like, they need PR to talk about how they fired their PR person, except they fired their PR person. So whoever's announcing this is doing a terrible job. Just a cultural fit. And what do they think? Everybody's be like, oh, sure, the only woman who's like got any meaningful like role in the NFL, and you're just gonna fire her because it's not a quote cultural fit. What the hell does that mean? And then everybody's gonna be like, okay, cool, fine, whatever. And everybody was like, what? So
yeah.
And the fact that it brings out the fact that she's the only woman in this high level kind of role is like, whoa, like, wow, really? I mean, baseball's got coaches and now a general manager, and they can't even keep one woman at the head of PR on any NFL team. The hell is wrong with them? They not only did a bad PR job for themselves, they just did it for the NFL too. I'm sure the other teams are furious at them.
Looks like they're getting a lot of blowback. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. When I read his quote, I have more empathy for his scenario as a leader myself, right? That's James Roots. You know, when he says it was definitely my call. I gave her the role a number of years ago and just felt the need to make a change. I mean, because I know as a manager that it's also, you know, things can go sour or go south, and suddenly there's somebody's unhappy in their role, and if you can't get that back on track within a reasonable amount of time, the whole thing can get poisoned.
Or the guy who let her go didn't realize how beloved she was, which I have seen and felt happen before. And they're like, wait, what? Like, I didn't know that anybody, because they're not really, people are so into their own thing. And so many people are narcissistic. And then there's real narcissists, you know, and so like the fact that he let her go was maybe like the worst decision that he didn't even realize was such a bad decision. That's why if you're a manager, you really have to look at this from like a 360 and not just your point of view. But again, it goes back to there's some other thing that was going on that we may never know about, and she'll probably get some buyout and won't ever be able to tell anybody about it. In the meantime, I think that I could probably help the Texans.
That's your pitch. You handled this horribly. Hire me.
I'm not moving to Houston though.
Should we move on to our horror story of the week?
Oh yeah, wait, we got that. We weren't allowed to read it, right? So you should read it.
Okay. I traveled to China to manage a client conference for various tech companies. Not only was there a huge language barrier, in parentheses, only one person on the event staff spoke English. The Chinese member company that was hosting the conference was being real shady about everything. It was my job to control the messaging of all keynotes, presentations, and guest speakers to ensure that none of the companies represented were touting their individual services or products. After reviewing and approving the host company's keynote material and ensuring that the invited Chinese press had been confirmed in advance and officially registered, I thought I had done my due diligence and everything would run smoothly. That was not the case. The president of the Chinese host company approached the podium for his keynote and went completely rogue. Everything he was saying, in parentheses, as it was being simultaneously translated, was not what had been approved. And he kept saying how their newest product feature was so great, knowing key journalists were in the audience listening. My jaw dropped and there was nothing that I could do. It's not like I was going to run up to the microphone and pull the plug on it in front of hundreds of people. I just let it ride out as I sat there and shot an email off to our main client contact about what was happening. He wasn't able to travel to the conference due to health reasons and was several time zones away. The icing on the cake was when I caught the host company president hosting backroom briefings with press that weren't on our registered press list. Needless to say, there was a lot of feedback given to the host company during our postmortem conference call of everything that was handled poorly and should not happen again in the future. Oh, that sounds like...
Oh, I'm going off frame because I can't. Whoever your client contact is isn't there and is probably sleeping because it's 4 o'clock in the morning or whatever. So you have to like sit and stew with this for hours around the world, not able to do anything because you don't even speak the same language as 99% of the people. And as they said, what are you going to do? Run out and dive on the podium and be like, no! I mean, why did they even bother have a PR person go?
I mean, and what could the client have done anyway?
Oh,
I mean, I feel like I want to rip my hair out just thinking about being there.
I don't even know what to say. I mean, it's one of those things like that was a complete surprise and you're in a foreign land and you don't speak the language where you can't do anything. I would just be like, and go out and just.
I mean, it sounds like the individual handled it really well by contacting the client as soon as it was happening. So at least it wasn't.
Right, but the client, yes, I agree with that. That was all they could do. But of course, the client isn't going to see it for probably 10 more hours anyway.
No.
So.
And then what about the press briefings? What do you do about that?
Well, right. What are you going to like be like, you can't tell, you don't even know what they're saying probably, it sounds like. So, oh my God. Right. And so by the time your client is up, the story may have already been written and online. Wow. I mean, I suppose there's a certain type of PR person who would have been like, no, give me that. Everybody stop. But most people wouldn't do that. And I don't know if that's even a great idea.
It's not a great look.
I mean, maybe some of the media, stories, if they came out, maybe they were good, or maybe no press is bad press. I don't know.
I guess, no, I think at that point you just have to act like the cat's out of the bag and pivot whatever strategy you had for because it sounded like in this case, right, that there was a product launch that was happening later, right, that wasn't supposed to be revealed. I mean, that's how I read it. Did you read it that way?
So, I mean, I guess so. I guess you could be right. I didn't really think about it that way. As the PR person, I would have been like, oh, I guess they changed their strategy and just didn't tell me. I would not have assumed that it was rogue. I would have assumed that it was like something that last minute got changed. Yeah, that's what I would have thought. Yeah.
It sounds like in context you would have known, but
yeah,
sounds like just a nightmare. Yeah, I don't know that I have advice other than what this person already did. Sounds like they handled it as best they could. What a nightmare. Oh, that was a good one.
It was a good bad one.
It was a good bad one. Thank you so much for tuning in for the PR Wind Down podcast.
And many thanks to our guest, Hamish.
He was awesome.
For joining us today. He had a lot of good insights.
He was awesome. Remember to submit your own agency stories and questions. And if you like what we're doing, please share our show with your friends and colleagues. Don't forget, you can also subscribe and leave us a rating. And pro tip, a 5-star rating does help our show to reach more incredible PR pros like you.
And if you guys have any PR horror stories that you want to share with us about a firm you worked for, an experience you had, bosses, etc., send them in to us and we will read them on the air without your name or any indication of who you are and offer some advice and tips.
Please send those to contact@prwinddown.com.
I can't wait to wind down with you next week, April.
Likewise, Laura and everyone else. Bye.
Bye.